Now we will look at the Indian case. In case of India, what we find that there is a long history of foreign direct investment. During the 19th century, there were foreign firms that indeed became industrial after being, trading companies for a relatively short period of time. For instance, companies like Andrew Yule, McLeod Russell, Balmer Lorry in engineering in coal, and Bird Brothers in jute and coal. In fact, if you see in 1914, India was ranked 8th behind US, Russia, Canada, Argentina, among other countries in terms of inward foreign direct investment. In 1929 also, India was in fact ranked 3rd only after Canada and United States. So it has been a major attraction for investment, particularly during the early part of the 20th century coming from the British company. Now, when we look at what happened post independence, there's a very important statement from Indian then Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru in the policy statement on foreign enterprises in the Constitutional Assembly of India. He mentioned that as a rule, the major interest in ownership and effective control of an undertaking should be in Indian hands. Government will not object to foreign capital having control of a concern for a limited period if it is found to be in the national interest. What was being found that, for instance, the licensing of oil refineries like Burma Shell during the early 50s, where 100% foreign ownership was granted. Though majority ownership of the foreign enterprises was rare, but it was prevalent. So what we find here is that having identified that India being a laggard country in terms of technological development, there is indeed a need to have an interaction with the foreign companies, because these multinational enterprises can be a very important source of providing the technology, whether it could come through the technological collaborations or giving them access to own the particular company, and aware and being well aware of the fact that we need this technology to build the economy. This kind of a decision was being taken. So in the first 5-year plan, you find that foreign investments were allowed where the nation needed new production lines, where special skill was not available locally, and where the domestic production volume was insufficient to meet the demand. So what we're doing here, you see that in the national interest, it is found in the national interest here. So what is this national interest being defined as? So you find that where you do not have the production line, the Indian companies may not have the kind of capacity to produce, where the special skill which is required is not available. So there might be a need to in fact bring professionals from the outside, where the domestic production volume was insufficient to meet the demand, and there was also not any expectation that the indigenous industry would be able to pick up. So in 1961, what we find that the government released a list of industries where foreign investment was particularly welcome, noting the gaps in production capacity of the nation. The list included extremely profitable industries like pharmaceutical, aluminium, and fertilizer. Please note that so far the focus has been, allowing a certain amount of foreign ownership so that we can at least have an exposure to the newer technologies which these companies have. So far, we or maybe some kind of a technological collaborations that can happen, but the focus is not particularly in the context of establishing an R&D center as such. But the situation changed very immensely in 1970. Before that, if you look at the number, India was home to 46 foreign pharmaceutical companies, and though the operation of the multinational companies were also under a very restrictive regime, given the overall regulatory requirement which companies need to fulfill, not only foreign but also Indian. So this is a timeline where you can see the FDI policy of the country. You find the first phase from 1950 to 67. The identification that technology does lie with those foreign companies is prominent here. But at the same time, what you find is that the non-discriminatory treatment, in the sense that whatever treatment is accorded to the Indian companies, the restrictive regime in which the Indian companies operate, you find that the foreign companies also operate on the same, in the similar regime. Though there might be additional guidelines, additional requirements for them to fulfill when it comes to different factors. So apart from that, there could be profit and dividend. There was no restriction on remittances of profit and dividend, and ownership and control was largely preferred to be with Indians. Now, what happened during the 1967 to 1980 was a much more restrictive regime with respect to FDI without technology. For instance, above 40% stake was not allowed. Only in priority areas it was allowed. Then there was also a Foreign Exchange Regulation Act, where this was the discretionary powers were kind of executed in sanctioning different projects. This Foreign Exchange Regulation Act was passed in 1973 and it came into effect on January 1974. In fact, this act has a provision to cap the foreign investment in all the companies operating in the nation, and foreign companies, they have to dilute their shareholding to 40%. So, and moreover, violations of Foreign Exchange Regulation Act in fact led to the increasing of the criminal charges. Now that means that overall environment became extremely restrictive for the foreign companies. They have to dilute their shareholding. That means the ownership has to be given up. Moreover, in case if they want the ownership to be retained, they have to take special permissions, which was given only in few cases. As a result, what you find that many companies indeed exited India at that point of a time. This you align with the Patent Act changes which happened in 1970, and as a result what you find is that many companies left the country. So 54 companies, they applied to exit India, and 9 companies, they later also exited. Companies like IBM, Coca-Cola, Eastman Kodak, they left, but companies like HLL BAT continued. In fact, various foreign companies also left but in case of a pharmaceutical sector also left the economy. Then during the 80s, what we have found that it was identified that the foreign exchange is of much importance for the overall development, and as a result, foreign equity in export-oriented units was rather supported. Even fast channel for foreign direct investment clearance was also being created. So we started moving towards the liberalizing and globalizing phase as such during the 80s, particularly after 1985. Then came the major economic crisis in 1990-91, and what you find is that after that a majority of rules and regulations with respect to the functioning of the domestic industry as well as that of the foreign industry was being changed. So as we move towards liberalization, privatization and globalization, clearly we had more liberal policies. The foreign direct investment was in fact supported in infrastructure. The procedures which were created was rather transparent, and foreign direct investment was also supported through merger and acquisitions. Not only that, FERA was repealed in 1990 and Foreign Exchange Management Act came into picture, which made all violations regarding foreign exchange civil, not criminal. And as a result, the overall focus became to create an environment which is more investor friendly. Not only that, we have already studied that the patent system also underwent a majority of reforms starting from 1999, culminated in 2005. So what you find is an overall environment which is now more friendly towards foreign investment and also support of the innovation activities by providing product patents and also creating a mechanism through which there is an ease of patenting in the economy. So these are the some numbers which have seen that foreign direct investment net flows over a period of a time has increased as a percentage of the GDP. But what is our focus? Our focus is basically how much of a research and development is being undertaken by these foreign companies in the country. Once again, the idea is internationalization of research and development with India now as a host country. Paper by Reddy in 1997 has discussed that India is not only the R&D destination for adaptation and product development for the local market, but also for R&D activities related to new product and processes. So when you look at the activities which is being now studied by Reddy, the idea is not only a mere adaptation, like we said that it would be asset exploiting, but over a period of a time it is also moving into the other direction. Let us look at some literature in this particular case. Moving from Reddy's work, you see that there is an immense literature coming from Mrinalini and her co-authors, which has looked at the R&D centers which is being developed by the foreign companies in the country. They have collected data for more than 700 such companies, and they try to understand their research activities in the host country, that is India. They have indicated that though India is a attractive destination for R&D in the recent years, but what they found that essentially these multinational enterprises try to use the resources, or rather the skill which is available in the domestic economy. What are those resources? The human resource, the cheap skilled labor which is available, and that contributes to their international global research activity. So the indication is more towards the technology seeking along with the technology adaptation or exploitation, right? So clearly, India being a large market, the idea would be to introduce the newer product which might have been established in the domestic economy, but apart from that, there is a need for adaptation. So you will find that some of the wholly owned subsidiaries may have in-house R&D facilities, and apart from that, the companies may engage in establishing R&D centers, but the focus is once again in few sectors. The few sectors which are there are basically related to ICT or national science and as such. And another study by Elaswaran has observed that when you talk about these R&D centers of the foreign firms, particularly in the ICT sector where the study is conducted, these centers tend to have very weak linkages with the innovation system of the country. And the circulation of labor is once again very prominent, it is prevalent, but what you find is that the linkages with the NIS is rather limited, and as pointed by Mrinalini and co-author, the focus is rather the human resource which is available in the country. So here is a set of studies related to R&D centers in India, and I would encourage you to look at these in case if you are interested in conducting research in this area. A very recent study by Joseph et al. Has in fact highlighted that what about foreign direct investment in research and development. So what they found that first of all, there is an immense confusion with respect to how do you define FDI in R&D. They have also highlighted the difficulties in defining FDI in terms of 10%, etc., and later pointed out that it is very complex picture when we talk about foreign direct investment in research and development. They have identified more than 200 companies in which there is a foreign direct investment, and those companies are engaged in R&D. What they find is that when you talk about this FDI in R&D, in fact this constitutes a very small part of the total foreign direct investment flows or inflows to India as such. Moreover, these inflows are concentrated in few sectors like ICT, natural sciences, pharmaceutical and engineering only. Moreover, what they find that very few of the firms which have this FDI in R&D had indeed an in-house R&D units which are recognized by DSIR. DSIR gives a tax credit to the in-house R&D units which first requires a recognition, and these tax credits are essentially given to encourage, incentivize these units to invest in research and development activities. However, before giving those tax credit, it is required that these in-house R&D units get a recognition. So there is a proper due process for that. And what the study pointed out that very few firms with this FDI in R&D are indeed recognized by DSIR. Not only that, many of these firms do not even report their R&D investments, and what they are looking at is essentially R&D in network. That means they have identified some specific contribution that will come from this R&D center or maybe the particular unit within India, and it would be contributing to their international global chain of the innovation activity as such. What a very interesting trend has been pointed out by this paper is that when you look at the international patents which are being filed by such firms, there is an increasingly immense contribution coming from the Indian inventor. So once again, the human resource which is available in India is contributing to the international invention or innovative activities as such. But when you talk about assignee, that means who will own that particular patent and who would be able to further work on commercialize the patent, or would be rather to, in terms of who would be owning the patent, what you find that there is a declining trend in assignee. So this FDI in R&D, that means suppose a particular company, let us say a multinational enterprises X, it has invested in B, let us say in India. Now in India they are engaged in certain research and development, and in that investment out of which a certain patent comes. So in that particular patent you will find there would be a list of inventors which are now Indian. But what you will find that the assignee of that patent will not be B but rather X as such. So there is an increasing trend towards of inclusion of inventors from India, but many a times the companies may not be actual assignees of the patent as such. That means the ownership is being withheld or being held by the parent organization as such. One has to note that this would be dependent upon their contract that the companies may get into with respect to the foreign investment as such. So with this, we finished this topic on internationalization of research and development, the role of multinational enterprises in the national innovation system, how they get an access to the innovation system of a particular country and use it for developing the global products as such. Clearly, from a host country perspective, there are gains. For instance, a foreign company comes and establish their R&D center, when you will find that their local will be associated with that either as an employee or maybe as a supplier. Clearly there are going to be intangible gains which are going to accrue to the domestic economies. The knowledge spillovers which will come from them are most likely to benefit and benefit the host economy as such.